think about getting up for work in the morning, okay? And you wake up and you enjoy your job, but you don't love it, love it. You wish you could be doing something better. And isn't that true for everybody, for myself, for yourself, for everyone? Very few people in this world truly love and like what they do. Now, I'm not trying to get overly philosophical or what have you, but you'll see why I bring this up. So you're getting ready for work, right? And then you think to yourself, you know what? You're about to leave the door, you're about to leave your house, and you just say to yourself, something feels off today. Something just doesn't feel right. It doesn't click. All right, you know what that is? Whether or not you subscribe to the spiritual aspect of things, that is your soul. And that could be described, energetically through science and what have you, and physics, but that is your soul essentially telling the other elements of your body, the other aspects of your body, of your mind, this is not falling in line with what we thought our existence here would be. Now, I know that's extremely deep and extremely philosophical. Now, I want to make it very clear. This is not by any stretch of the imagination a spiritual episode, but I am trying to make a point here so that you guys can understand what we're going to be talking about as I continue on. Now, I won't be doing any shout-outs today just because there's so much to catch up on. This episode was actually supposed to be for Sunday, so I do want to thank you guys for being so patient because I was and still am a little bit under the weather, so if I take some pauses, just please bear with me. Now, what does HIVE stand for? HIVE stands for high velocity interference of vector-based elementals. Now, the title of this episode is Altering Human Spines to Suppress the Chakra and Create Synthetic Merkabas. Now, ultimately, what we first need to understand is what the chakra is and what the Merkaba is. Now, the chakra, allegedly, the human body has 7 of them, okay? Now, again, this is not necessarily a spiritual episode, but there are certain things that intertwine that through physics, the ghost particle may in fact be able to connect and relate through quantum computation and all of this information and what have you. Now, let's take a look here, for example, at Wikipedia. The chakra. The concept is found in the early traditions of Hinduism. Beliefs differ between the Indian religions, with many Buddhist texts consistently mentioning 5 chakras, while Hindu sources offer 6 or 7, end quote. So long story short, it essentially represents the different elements within the body. Now, I apologize if I butchered that definition, but for the sake of this episode, let's move on. Let's now understand what the Merkaba is. So according to OneTribeApparel.com, and I quote, there are many different symbols when it comes to sacred geometry, and many of these are printed on clothing and are used in jewelry designs. Now, long story short, the Merkaba is part of, end quote, is part of sacred geometry. It's essentially a couple of different triangles, one facing upwards, one facing downwards, and it has different meanings for different things spiritually. Now, the point here, though, is that when we look at the fact that whether it's in the Bible, the Quran, Buddhist scriptures and texts, you name it, every single negative entity and spirit talks about using the human spine to decapacitate someone or to deteriorate them or take them down. Now, I had somebody reach out to me. This is very important, guys. Someone reach out to me with substantial proof, and they wish to remain anonymous, but I'll be putting up some of the pictures right now of, for example, they have connections, their family having blood tie connections to things like the Philadelphia experiment, Operation Paperclip, and things like this. Now, this is when it's going to get interesting. One of the individuals that reached out to me has spent their lives, and I feel for them very sorely, in pain because their spinal cord in this physical world has been readjusted in order to allow for some type of either suppression or an attempt to open up the astral world in many different forms. Now, unfortunately, this was not successful, but the person who reached out to me provided me with all the information to substantiate that they had gone through this type of experimentation. Now, my research leads me to believe that they may in fact have been going through some process when they were young within a laboratory that they also acknowledge was the case based on their memory through a HIVE program. HIVE that I just mentioned earlier. Now, here's what's interesting. According to my source, very reliable, by the way, provided me medical transcripts, pictures, everything. Allegedly, there are give or take 75 to 80 people in the world who have had this experiment done on them. And when they call other doctors to try to have surgeries done on their spine in order to realign it, the doctors say, what the hell? What did you do? Excuse me, as if to say, did you go like skiing? Did you do something very physically demanding for your spine to be like this? Because we cannot correct it. Now, the interesting thing is that if we take a look at how many people have had this done to them officially that we know of. It's like I said, give or take 75 to 80. How many people in the world have the Rh null and Rh negative blood type? Allegedly, the ones that have gone missing, around that same number. Now, I would dare to say this could be a coincidence, but at the same time, it may not be. Now, this is when it's going to get very interesting. So we have to understand the difference, and I've spoken about this before, between Rh negative and Rh null. This is the golden blood that I've spoken about in the past. Now, the thing about the hive, allegedly about this high velocity interference of vector-based elementals, is that it uses sacred geometry in order to alter the human spine in certain ways that manipulate the chakras and allow for a synthetic Merkaba to be created. Now you might say, Dave, what's the point of a synthetic Merkaba? Well, it has been rumored and alleged in the past that gray aliens, specifically the ones that are used as vessels or energy transmitters, have been using these synthetic Merkabas to create, or at least try to create, human souls in correspondence with certain people, human beings that are part of the LACE program, the low-level augmentative crossbreeding experimentation, as well as the deep underground military base programs as well. And this ties in perfectly with one of the many issues that I've spoken about before that has been confirmed to us in classified documents that have either been declassified or quote-unquote leaked, which is that they can create and clone humans, but they have problems cloning a soul. And this seems to be the same issue that other extraterrestrials have as well. And again, I'll put the emails up on the screen for you guys right now. There is proof to suggest this as well. Now, here's what's also interesting. My source, according to what they have told me, has said that their family was one of the first, all right, to experiment with ARPANET back in the 80s and 90s. Now, this is what's also interesting. What is ARPANET? So, according to Wikipedia, ARPANET stands for the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, was the first wide area packet switching network with distributed control and one of the first networks to implement the TCP/IP protocol suite. Both technologies became the technical foundation of the internet. End quote. Now, this is what's extremely interesting. We do know that, CERN and all that and DARPA were part of helping to literally create the actual fundamental principles and aspects and elements of what we consider to now be the internet. But this is what's also very interesting. ARPANET is the same code name used for every and any body that is going into the Hive program. Okay, and this is all coming full circle. Now, I do want to, again, thank my source who wishes to remain anonymous respectfully, and I can respect and appreciate that. But at the same time, what my source is saying here, which came to me a few days just before I got sick a few days ago, lines up perfectly with exactly what I was going to bring out and present to you guys anyways, except this only makes it better because it only adds to the overall aspect of this project and only furthers to prove the possibility of this project being the case. Now, I don't want to do any disservice to my source. I do want to mention that this person has written me lengths and lengths of text in which I will be covering down in future episodes. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to cover it all in one shot, but it essentially confirms this Hive program that I have heard and that have there's kind of been, whispers all over and things like this as to whether or not it existed. But this source has essentially proved that for me. Now, here's the interesting thing as well that is interesting. Now, we know for a fact that there are grids around Earth. Now, and there's many different types, whether that is in the astral realm or in different dimensions with different beings visiting us and things like this. But here's the interesting thing, and this is where we get to more of a physical aspect of it. So, let's take a look at thedrive.com, and I quote, "The Navy finally speaks up about its bizarre UFO patent experiments." Now, it's gotten so much attention, particularly from the military world lately, that a lot of people have been asking, why the hell would you patent things that you guys claim, even if you're the Air Force, and we know you patent stupid things all the time, why would you patent things that you claim that to not actually work if they don't function? Well, they said that after about $500,000 later, I'm just summing up the article for you guys, and about, a handful of test subjects afterwards, they came up with nothing. It was impossible to do this. And the patent had to do with an EMF generator field, so electromagnetic frequential generator field. Essentially, long story short, being able to control, manipulate not just EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, but gravity as well. They said this came up false. Now, allegedly, this was a patent that leaked into the FOIA office, which is the Freedom of Information Act. But why do I bring this up? Because this is the same mechanism that is used to allow for this hive base to actually become mobile. So this hive base is not only underground, but at the same time, it can also be lifted up through what seems to be, by these patterns here, through rocky terrain if need be, or very rough terrain, and actually be able to transport itself. Now, can it transport in space or something like this? That's very hard to say, but the point here is that this base, this hive base, is known to actually be mobile and at the same time use sacred geometry to allow for some type of connection that seems to, I guess we could say, encompass the overall aspect of using spirituality to connect with the vibrational brains of this universe, of everything all around us, in order to either suppress or allow for more of an astral experience to occur. Now, when I say astral, I don't mean just astral projection. I'm talking about many different things overall. Now, again, according to my source, this was done only on a handful of people in order for there to be more access to the astral realm. However, what we also need to look at too is we need to understand that sacred geometry it's not necessarily what is being drawn or what is being written, whether it's text or symbolism. We need to understand that it is the energy that gives meaning to it. Okay, so let's take a look, for example, at the pentagram. Let's say, now this is a controversial symbol. I understand that. It's not for me to decide whether or not the pentagram is a good thing or a bad thing, because there's, it's all about perception, and we've spoken about that before. So the last thing I'd want to do is encourage perception, to view things differently than I myself don't. But the point here is that it's not necessarily the shape of the pentagram that gives its frequential meaning. I mean, it could be because of how long it's been used for so long over the ages. But the point here is that ultimately the pentagram is the energy that is being emitted onto it frequentially. Now, whether or not that is positive or negative is a bit of a different story, but that is not the point here, guys. The point here is that when we take a look at, for example, these alleged, electromagnetic gravity generator fields that failed, these documents that they claim failed, we look at this. We look at the fact that it is loosely connected with the ARPANET program, which is a subset of Hive, which ARPANET used to be, the test for the initial internet network-based programming, but ultimately, the names get moved and they get changed. And so we have ARPANET, we have the documents, we have ARPANET loosely connected to Hive, and on top of that, we have a very reliable source who has provided all of their information to prove they were part of these programs. And not only this, but this only adds to more of a cover-up. And why do I say that? Because my source has told me that they have been given, and has also shown me, guys, the receipts to prove this, that they have been given, ever since this test was done on them, $8,000 a month in cash from the government as like a pension, for example, medical benefits they didn't know they had, relocated into housing if need be, very well-off housing. And it almost kind of looks like this is the government trying to tell my source, essentially, to stay quiet. Now, I do want to mention there's a lot of things I left out there, but the point here is that this hive base not only inhabits these types of different experiments and beings, but at the same time, it allows for the synthetic Merkabahs to be created, which allows for an ascendance on different spiritual levels, but ultimately there comes a point where it stops, because the word is by definition in the name, synthetic. Synthetic meaning fake, not real, a replica, not clearly authentic, not like you, not like myself, doesn't have a soul. And this ties in perfectly with a handful of documents I also covered a couple weeks ago, having to do with the fact that clones can be made, and there's about 4 or 5 different tier level clones that can operate on their own, very similar to that of, I guess we could say, Michael Fassbender in the film Prometheus or Alien Covenant, these robotic AIs that don't have a soul but live forever, essentially, just because, I mean, they're synthetic, they're fake, they don't have a biological depravity, they don't age or anything like this, right? And so ultimately, that's the whole goal here, that's the point. And the purpose here is that if this type of, I guess we could say, person, body, you name it, could be created with a synthetic Merkabah, a synthetic soul, the soul in essence would not be telling the body what age it is, what it has to do, what it is feeling emotionally, which therefore would not allow for those electrons to be converted into the chemical compounds that control our emotions physically as human beings. Okay? So ultimately, this has to go back with the very first example that I gave at the beginning of this episode, which is what I said about how when you leave for work in the morning and you just don't feel right, it's because it's things like this. And for example, my source is only one of many people who have been experimented on, although I have to say, albeit very seldom, And it's unfortunate that they had to go through this. But ultimately, and it's very terrible, but ultimately we see here that the government does not take the spinal cord, the astral projection aspect of things, does not remove these things out from the mix entirely. As a matter of fact, it seems as though they're trying to create and induce synthetic Merkabas through the use of altering human spines in order to implement these things into the bodies of these creatures they're developing within the Hive program. So I really want you guys to let me know what you think, because at the end of the day, there's just so much here to take a look at that it's almost as if this connects to every single project we've ever done. And the only thing is that I don't have the location of this Hive base. Now, allegedly, it's in Denver. That's according to a source of mine, but that's all I want to go off of, because I don't want to say I know this for a fact until I do, or I hopefully am able to find this out for sure. So please let me know what you guys think. There is a lot to connect here. It might be a little bit of an oversimplification, but the whole point here is to allow your mind to expand and understand the way in which some of these experiments take place. There's no morals, guys. There's no ethics. There's none of that. Nothing whatsoever. And if that means you got to alter some human spines in order to do this, meaning that those spines can never be reverted back to their original position, so people like my source who have reached out to me cannot stand up again, then I guess so be it. That's the way they think. But that's a terrible thing. And ultimately, we're going to see here, based on, the documents and everything I've provided as evidence, and we can come up with our own conclusion. But I want you guys to let me know what you think, because the timing of all this seems to be a little bit ironic in many different areas. So again, thank you guys for your patience the last few days, and we will catch you tomorrow. Cheers.